How much rejection can you take? At barely 5 feet tall, Lorraine Potter achieved firsts in two male-dominated professions: religion and the military. She loved God and her country, and her purpose was to serve both. In this episode of Pause for Purpose, learn how she conquered obstacles as the first female chaplain in the U.S. Air Force.
Lorraine Potter is our honored guest today, and Lorraine grew up in Warwick, Rhode Island, which is really where it all began. She graduated, as several of you know, from Keuka College in upstate New York in 1968. And as a newly minted graduate, at that point, she had a double major in psychology and also religion, and then went on quickly, pursued her education, earned a Master of Divinity degree at Colgate Rochester Divinity School that was up in Rochester, New York. In 1971, got another master's in arts degree in personnel management from Central Michigan University. And in 1980, and further work at the Air Command and Staff College in 85, and again in 89 at the Air War College, all by correspondence. So with that in mind, as far as educational background, we're going to go back to pick up the whole story with what happened post-college graduation. And to do that, I want to introduce to some of you the real Vicki Thomas, who is co-founder of My Future Purpose, who is going to host this informal fireside chat with Lorraine Potter. And as I said, we'll have an opportunity informally later if some of you just want to stay and just have some informal conversation. So with no further ado, Vicki and Major General Lorraine Potter, it's yours. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone from Keuka for joining us this afternoon, and thank you Harlan and everyone who helped get the word out to be able to participate in this very important Veterans Day discussion. It seems fitting that as we look at our military and those who served, that many who went in early, as Lorraine did, in the 70s, we were dealing with discrimination. Well, I guess many would say we still are today. And Lorraine chose two professions that were predominantly male dominated professions: the religion and the military. So Lorraine, let's start with a little bit of your personal history, if we could, a little bit about your family, your college, your years at college, how you were how many of you saw Lorraine at the clicker line with her clicker in the cafeteria?
Dining room.
Yes. Okay. So Lorraine, you want to share a little bit about how that experience led to leadership?
Yes.
You never know where it's going to begin.
I know. And God is full of surprises, and I'm the most surprised one sitting here. As Joyce mentioned, I grew up in Rhode Island. I think that's significant because, first of all, my background, religious background, my family was in the American Baptist Church. Remember Roger Williams? Religious freedom, that's where the Baptist denomination really began in our country, and the emphasis of free exercise. Although Rhode Island is predominantly Roman Catholic, 90%, 5% Jewish, and the rest were Protestant. And so I really got a sense of what it was, in a way, religiously to be a minority. But the church was the center of our family life as I was growing up. I have an older brother, 6 years older, and I have a twin sister. And what's important about that, both of them, is one is I wanted to do whatever my older brother did. Number two was my sister is an hour older than I, and I always wanted her to check things out, send her out first, because I really didn't like new things or anything like that. So it's kind of amazing that I'm the one that left home and traveled the world to do that. But my family was, grandparents were immigrants. My father never earned more than, I guess when he was first married, my brother was born, he earned $12 a week. When the most I ever knew he earned was $200 a week. So the important values we got was that our family was important. We never ate dinner unless everyone was there. The other one was that church was very central. My mother was a lay minister. She was not trained, but was a lay minister in the church. I think that the most important thing was that our parents, from the time I can remember, expected that the girls, my sister and I, would have college educations, as well as my brother, although neither of my parents went to college. And the other thing was that the girls were all told, my brother included, whatever you want to do, you work hard enough, you accomplish it. There was no sense of discrimination or any non-acceptance. Whatever Bob did, my brother, I tried to do. So I had a role model, and it was my faith that encouraged me to leave home. It was while I was a teenager that I experienced a real sense of God's presence in my life, and decided that I wanted to share that. So that's how I chose to go to an American Baptist related school. I was not going to apply because $2,100 a year tuition, which is nothing now, was a lot for my family. But my dad said, you know, if you want to go and you're accepted, we'll find a way. The best decision and most important decision in my life was to go to Keuka College. That impacted my career, my life, and the direction that it went. Part of it was that it was a safe environment. You know, I had good roommates. Lois was my first. She helped to break me in. But it was far from home. But I also knew that at Keuka, the advantages were that we had to work if you had a scholarship. And I learned, one of the important lessons that I learned was that you learn probably more from what you do, your experiences, than you do from books. And I will say that my work in the dining room, which I didn't want to do when I first got there, was most important in learning how to work with others, and actually gave me leadership and management training. You know, I was responsible my last year and a half at Keuka for managing over 80 girls who served in the dining room. Their payrolls, if something didn't go right, it was my fault. And managing time. So and the other part of Keuka's experience is the field period. You know, we go out and we learn by doing and going and working in the real world, so to speak, to do that. And that was important for my future, was to look at what experience and what am I learning while I was working. The fact that it was a women's college was absolutely vital, because if we were going to have leaders there, the girls had to do it. There weren't guys there who were going to be the president and we could be the secretary. If you're going to be in charge or in a group, the women had to step up. We also had instructors there, which gave us a sense that each of us was important. And I know that Amy Story's emphasis as they're looking at the future still is, we've got to be student-centered, and we very much were. Student-centered and saying that we are important. And this is where I built my confidence and my sense of competence in terms of education, was at Keuka. And I'll say that my family was the Keuka family, because I was 400 miles from home. We did not have a telephone except for emergency calls, so that was important. I also learned, though, that life wasn't easy, because my father was terminally ill my junior year of college. And I was a religion major. I believe God had been in my life, and I will tell you, for the last year at Keuka College, my God was absent. My God was dead. But I was a religion and a psychology major. What do you do with a religion major? But I also knew that in some ways I wanted to pursue what other people believed about God if I didn't know it. And so I had made the decision just a couple months before my father's death that I would go on to seminary. Very practical reason. It was cheap, and I had a place to live, and I could afford it while I searched. And yet it was an academic community, which I wanted to do. I thought I would teach theology or do something like that. So I went on to go to Colgate Rochester. But the most important lesson I learned was that life's uncertain. But what Keuka gave me was a family who showed that I wasn't going through whatever the family crisis was alone, that I had people who cared for me. I remember sharing in a baccalaureate with a theme of God with skin on. I will tell you that the students, and particularly the staff in the kitchen, they were my family. They were God with skin on. The students took a collection, $1 here, $1 there. And 4 weeks before Dad died, they handed me money so I could go home and say goodbye. It was that kind of community and support that said they were really my God with skin on at that time to do that. And this is where I learned the essence of what I will say is my favorite quote. This you had at the end of my speech here, but my favorite quote really came from when you're in a time of crisis. St. Francis said, "Start by doing what's necessary." I had to finish college. That was my dad's goal for me in his life. Do what's necessary, then do what's possible. And then you'll soon find that you're doing the impossible. When you're in crisis, you hardly know how to put one foot in front of the other or what to do. And this is particularly as we get older and we deal with losses. What do? Do what's necessary. Then do what's possible. And you'll find out that you're able to do what's impossible. With my sense of a lost faith, I ended up going into seminary, and I would say that the seminary was, it taught me two things. First of all, when I got there, because of my background, and I know Chris Algar, who's in our audience here, knows, my background in theology and psychology meant that I was academically more prepared than most of the seminary students who were there, the males. But it also was the first time I experienced discrimination because I was a woman. Can't do anything about that. Don't want to do anything about that. But that's the kind of experience that the minorities have when they look at the color of their skin or the language they speak or the religious faith they have. You know, some of it we choose, but a lot of it we don't. So it's like, what are you doing here? Why are you here? It wasn't as severe because I had a support community there, but that was the first time I ever encountered it. So, and then I encountered it much more obviously as I went further. I'm going to stop there, Vicki, because I want you to
Okay, yes. I want to ask you, where did your interest in the U.S. Air Force Chaplain Corps, at what time did that enter your thought of something that you'd like to do? How did that happen?
Well, also while I was at Keuka, my brother was in the Army and in Vietnam. That was my sophomore year, which was always a test kind of a thing. But my brother had gone into the service because my father, who was actually legally blind, could never have served. And our country was so important to our grandparents. The gift of living in the United States of America was so important that he went in kind of to fulfill my father's sense of obligation and his dream to serve our country. And of course, what did I say earlier? I wanted to do what my brother did. So while I was at Keuka thinking about, I've got to find a way to support myself. That was the importance of a college education for my parents, for us, particularly as girls, to be able to support ourselves. And I thought of the Air Force. It wasn't until I was trying to get a job and I was already ordained. I had had some extra training in pastoral care and counseling in my residencies, but the Baptist churches weren't hiring a woman preacher. I didn't want to be a woman preacher, but I knew I had to do that in order to get a job in a hospital. So the Air Force, and my brother kept saying, if a girl, you got to go Air Force. So Air Force. And then when I was looking for a place to do ministry after my training, I thought I had a colleague and some seminary folks who'd been in the service. So that's when I wrote to the Chief of Air Force Chaplains and asked if it was possible. Now, remember, this is in 1971, 72. I was ordained in 71. The first woman in the American Baptists of Rhode Island ever ordained. So again, that I was sort of surprised that happened. I was in seminary with the first women who were training to become priests in the Episcopal Church. They were not accepted at that time. So I knew there was some of that hesitation. So I knew change was slow and it was coming, but I was not, rah, rah, I'm going to go break some glass ceilings. I needed a job. So that's why I wrote.
And what kind of response did you get?
Oh, yes. Well, when I wrote, I just asked, was it possible? And I got a letter, which was a form letter back from the Air Force Chief of Chaplains that said that, here's a letter, here are the requirements. I had all the requirements except the last one. And the last one said, and you must be male. So my first reaction was, oh, whoops, that's not open. I guess I need to rethink. God will help me find some way. But 2 weeks later, I got a letter, which was kind of, I told the Chief of Chaplains later, that was his oops letter. He hadn't really read it because he didn't answer, can I as a woman come in? But they said, oh, by the way, the Chief of Chaplains has now deleted the gender requirement. Well, the reality was that while in '64 we had the Equal Rights Amendment passed, it was the Equal Employment Opportunity Amendment that had passed, and no federal job could be discriminated based on race, religion, gender. So it was open if my church would send me in. So that's how it opened. I was scared to death, didn't want to go that far from home, but I knew that if the door opened, maybe I ought to take it and go in. So
where did you go? Where did you end up?
Well, I had finished training that the Air Force wanted and was planning to establish, which was clinical pastoral education, they call it, for chaplains in the Air Force. And it was going to be down at Wilford Hall, which is our largest medical center here in San Antonio. So God was good, the Air Force was good. I had been a hospital chaplain for at least 2.5 years, which is also where I want to get back into the theme of this, where I determined what my purpose was. My purpose and my ministry was all shaped by my experiences walking with people through the crises of health care. And it was that I wanted to be a fellow traveler with people in crisis, with people who were struggling with their faith, with what was happening to them. And that was where I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be a preacher. I want to travel with people in crisis. And then when I joined the Air Force, the first thing I realized was, and those who have been in the military know this, everyone in the military is either on the edge of crisis or in the middle of a crisis. And by that, I mean that it's not just you, it's your family members. Every time someone gets orders to move, someone's going to be unhappy in your family, and particularly as you get teenagers. I'm not going with you, but can I stay with my buddy? I don't want to go. Or a spouse has a really good job, they're in crisis. Or when now with all these deployments, the families who have people deployed to dangerous areas, they're constantly living in anxiety and fear. And there is no better ground for me to be a traveler and to live the same life as they do. So it really fulfilled my purpose. And which is why I went in for 3 years, because I needed a job and I needed experience, because I was going to go teach other clergy in hospital settings. But I found my real basis of extensive traveling with people in crisis or on the edge of crisis to do that.
So when you went in, and you're in the Air Force now, and you're accepted, how were you accepted by the men around you who were chaplains as well as military? And you're only like barely 5 feet tall.
Yes. Actually, that's I'm glad you mentioned that, being challenged vertically. But when I first came in, I had to go to a chaplain school. It was our orientation, our basic training. And this is the first time I experienced hostility from some of my colleagues there for being there, and had one person come up to me and said, you took a job away from a more deserving man. They only accepted so many people. They only accepted 30 chaplains a year, more deserving and qualified. They didn't know that actually of the 30 folks in my class, I was the most qualified in terms of education and training. But you know, that was that challenge. I ended up for 6 weeks not having dinner with anyone because no one wanted to invite me. Talking about being shunned to do that. But I realized that, you know, I needed to be gracious. I needed to walk the walk and to talk that I was there to do a service. And what helped me through it, whatever challenges, I knew that I was doing what God had called me to do. And there were airmen who would challenge me when I was a major, which I'd been in about 8, 9 years, would say, you're doing the work of the devil, because it says in the scriptures, women should be silent in church. They should not preach. You know, one of the struggles in the military is they do not tolerate prejudice, but commanders are afraid to deal with religious prejudices because they see that as very personal. My goal was to realize and say to them, while you may have issues and struggle with that, know that God is calling me to do this, but the other part of it is there are other chaplains that are around who can be your pastor. You have a choice. It's not like I was in a church as the only pastor and having to take care of all their needs. That gave me great comfort. And I learned the privilege of serving on a diverse staff because I didn't have to do it all. So as I started, that was not it. What was helpful in being accepted, though, was after my time at Wilford Hall, working in the hospitals, doing this training program for 2 years, I supposedly, according to the chief's office, volunteered to go on an unaccompanied tour. That would be like today, they call it a deployment. And I went to Korea. For 12 months, these were unaccompanied. There were only about, on a base of 5,000 people, there were 20 women officers and no more than 50 women there. When I came back, though, I had my male colleagues saying, you're now a real chaplain. You know, I would, as if they were present with me, I'd pinch myself and say, well, I've always been real, you know, but I knew what they meant. You know, it's kind of like they were concerned that I would get cushy, good jobs and they would do the tough jobs. They found out that I was the first one who went on this unaccompanied tour in my class. So I was not going to get exceptions. And that sort of paved the way of some acceptance to it. I found that I was most accepted by the Catholic Church priests, because I wasn't a priest. I was a chaplain. And they found that not to be threatening to their position.
So tell us about some of the assignments besides Korea. Now wait, let's go back a little bit, because you said you were going to do this for 3 years.
Yes.
We're now beyond 3 years. We're into 8 years, right?
Yeah, well, actually,
how did that happen?
At the 3-year point, I had to make a decision. And again, this is God's sense of humor. I was in Korea, and I'm not a very trusting person that someone would hire me if I said I'm going to separate and go in the civilian world and go into a civilian hospital. So I took my next assignment, which again was encouraging because I got sent to Pease Air Force Base in New Hampshire. 100 miles from,
wow.
Whoa. I didn't have to take leave to go home for the holidays. So, you know, and I could, you know, drive home and back again in one day if I didn't want to stay at home. But it was that assignment. And at that point I said, I'm going to stay in as long as I am feeling like I belong here and I'm comfortable and I'm basically having a good time. So I stayed that long because, and I said, when I get to 12 years, those who've been in the military, when you get to 20, you can retire. I said, if I get to 12 years, I ain't quitting. I'll put up whatever. Because I'm going to get my 20 years, get my retirement. And I knew that I would be able to stay 20 because it would only require one promotion to major. I never had dreams that I would go any further than that. But I wasn't in to get promoted. I was there to serve and be a chaplain. And I enjoyed that. So
you mentioned that you had to, when you went in, there was very little training for you and you kind of had to self-train. You kind of trained yourself.
Yeah.
Why was that? And how did the guys get trained and you didn't? What happened there?
I think that we all kind of got treated the same way, except for example, when I got commissioned, they didn't know where to put the cross on my uniform. They asked me, where should I do it? I said, well, where do the guys put it? Also, where in the medical corps do the women put their insignia, that kind of stuff. But part of the learning is that you come from your experience. Well, I'd been a hospital chaplain. I'd not been a military chaplain. I didn't know who to salute. If they moved and walked, and I guess I just saluted. But I had to learn that. We learn some of that as you go along. The other thing that I learned was I would look around, because not all chaplains did this, which is probably why I was more successful. I would look around at what the requirements were for other officers in other career fields, which is why I ended up going to the Air Command and Staff College, and why I went to War College and finished that before it was required for chaplains. So that I learned that I was responsible for my own training. Chaplains got lazy because if the Air Force wanted you trained in something, they'd send you to a school down at the chaplain school for 2 weeks. Well, I didn't stay limited to that. I realized that I wanted to go out and experience it. I also learned you had to ask to do things you didn't know how to do. We manage books and funds. None of the chaplains wanted to do that. I'll counsel, I'll go preach. Don't make me do the admin work. Well, guess what? When you go higher up, your job is administration and management, which is also why I took the degree in personnel management. Because I thought that we had some of the dumbest personnel managers trying to control the rest of our careers. So I thought, let me at least learn what they teach in personnel management. So that's part of the learning thing that I did that others did not necessarily do. And I still mentor others and say, look at what the Air Force or the Army or whoever is requiring of the others, and go get that training. Get that same experience. Don't ask for exceptions. And if you're a minority, that's one of my lists, don't ask for exceptions. You better be more trained, more qualified, and don't say, well, I'm a chaplain. I don't need to go to War College and learn about war. Well, you're going to be living in a war environment. No, I don't have to worry about being able to do physical training. Well, you better be able to run and be able to carry whatever it is you have to carry if you're out in the field. So look at what others are required, do it, and be prepared ahead of time. I think that's true in any career field. Don't wait for someone to tell you you need a qualification. How do you move up in whatever your organization is? You got to know what the next person's job is and what they're looking for and what their requirements are. That's where, if you don't know anything about computers nowadays, you better learn it.
How did you handle difficult and hurtful moments? How did you, as a woman, we kind of sometimes get emotional. Yeah. And did you ever feel that when hurt came upon you?
Yeah, let me go back to the one about my being vertically challenged. In some ways, it was helpful for me to be small, because I was physically non-threatening when I'd walk into a room. We had some other women come in who were rather larger, taller women, and they struggled much more than I did because I could kind of slip in, and I wasn't dainty, but I looked more dainty and less threatening. So that was an advantage to do that. I think that the most hurtful part was, first of all, I expected to be challenged when I first came in. And when you're the first, I also want to say that I went in very conscious that I would be watched. I was living in a fishbowl. And I felt very responsible that I would not do anything that would make it more difficult for any woman who came and followed. At times that was kind of heavy to carry. It also kept me focused. And I also had what helped me was realizing if I really believe God called me and I'm where God wants me to be, just relax in that. I also had once I married my spouse, he's a Army chaplain. He knew what I was going through, but he could support and encourage me. I could go home. I would never cry, would never fight, would never argue. I wanted to be seen as gracious, accepting, and my job was to refer people who had a problem. I also, in my own head, said, you got a problem with me being here? That's your problem. It's not mine.
How did you were promoted and you'd get promotions in the military.
Mm-hmm.
Now some of the other men would have to take orders or respect your what you said. How did you overcome some of their sensitivities to you giving orders and them accepting it?
Well, first of all, even coming in early, we had enlisted people, chaplain assistants who worked for us, and they would take directions from me when I was a brand new captain on active duty. I only had one chaplain's assistant who ended up talking with one of the other chaplains, very much against supporting anything I did. And I realized if I had a program going and he was supposed to support, set up and whatever, don't ask him to do it, get someone else to do it. But if you cannot work for someone because of something you believe, the Air Force, the military says, get out. We will not retain people who cannot work in a diverse environment. The other advantage is if it's for a religious reason, we're not going to adjust the policies of the military for your religious belief. You can separate for that reason. So that was part of it. I think where I had to deal more so was I had been on active duty 7 or 8 years, went from working in the chief of chaplain's office for a year in a training environment that they invited me to, and I traveled with the Air Force chief of chaplains. So I thought, no big deal. I was treated very nicely when I traveled with a 2-star. That was kind of nice. Then I went over to Germany, and this is where I got my most direct confrontations and challenges about a woman being in a pastoral role because I was, pastoring a congregation for the Air Force. And I was more hurt because I traveled and I just thought there was going to be no big deal anymore. But even at that time, there were only 5 women chaplains out of 650 on active duty. So there were not a lot of experience. But I learned to just say, let me refer to you. If it was a problem with another chaplain, I would confront him and say, you need to deal with this, but not with me. And my job is to take care of the people who come in and refer them, which means if they come in and need a Catholic priest, I found one. If they came in and they wanted to talk to an Episcopalian or they needed a rabbi, my job was to find them that resource. Now, if they came in, they better not say to me, I'm not going to come talk to you because you're a woman. Now, that means that was against the policy. Now, they did say it to some of the enlisted people. And what was incredibly kind of funny, not a funny laughing thing, but funny is that on 2 of the staffs, one was in Korea and one was when I was in Germany, I was the most trained and qualified counselor on the staff. So they'd take someone else who's less trained because they weren't a woman. Well, good. Okay, go. I've got enough to do. I got others who I can counsel, and I sort of would let that go. But the importance was as I got challenged when I got higher up in rank, which was when I got to be general officer, it was even more severe, was that, I wanted to be seen as gracious, not promote. I would acknowledge that their behavior or their, my answer usually was, you have a right to your prejudices, but don't act on them in the Air Force and don't talk to them.
You mentioned in a conversation Joyce and I had, I think maybe it was you and I asked you what was one of your most memorable tours, one of your most memorable, and you talked about your experience. You went to Beirut and then you wound up going to Iraq.
Yes.
Share that story.
Actually, this was when I was chief of chaplains, and which, again, God's sense of humor. I never expected, I knew I was as qualified and the most qualified. I'd look at those of similar rank considered, but I never thought politically that they would choose a woman to be the chief of chaplains. But my last overseas tour where I was visiting the deployed sites, I was in Saudi Arabia, and I was, which was the largest base, and man, I was gonna preach at the largest base in all of that area of what we call it area of responsibility. And 2 hours before, they came to me and said, sorry, we got to change your itinerary. We need you to go to Iraq, to Baghdad International Airport. They had the folks in the area had taken ground fire. There'd been casualties the night before, and they thought it would be helpful if I would go kind of bring I guess, the spiritual dimension to them. So in spite of my disappointment, I thought, okay, let's do this. And it was the first time while I was over there that I experienced where they told me that when you've got an active ground fire going on, you don't bring an airplane in normally just landing like that. Why? Because they'll shoot you out of the sky. So what would happen is and I was in a small white jet, they circle the airport, kind of spiral coming down, because it's a much smaller area for any gunfire to take place. And I was glad they told me, because I would have been sicker than a dog if I'd not known I was going to be going in a circle to do that. And as I landed, it was amazing. They had worked all night taking care of casualties, both, and we take care of everybody, enemy casualties as well as our own. And so they briefed me about what was happening, and they wanted me to do a worship service. And the chapel tent has a fire capacity, but there were over 130 people in this tent, all faith groups, who after that night wanted to come and hear the chief of chaplains kind of get a word. And what I realized as I was going into that experience was my role as a chaplain was very vivid in the way I landed. And can you just picture this little white airplane? It's like a dove coming down to bring a word of hope and the promise of peace to a war-torn environment. That was the message that we as chaplains wanted to bring. The other message as chaplain is you want to let them know that wherever you go, God travels with you. You're not abandoned, you're not alone. And I use this when I have spoken both on active duty, as I was terminated, I say, this is the mission of the chaplaincy, to remind people that we have a bigger mission. Our mission is to bring peace. We're doing the work of God when we are trying to feed the hungry. How do the people get into disaster areas for help? It's the military airplanes that get you in first. So we're bringing to rescue people. We're feeding the hungry. We're trying to give people comfort and courage. We heal them. So with that, it just confirms that I was doing, for me, the work of the gospel, and that our country does the work of the gospel on this Veterans Day. So look at all we do to make a difference in our world, to improve the quality of our world. And when our country does not act in a way that shows that we have freedom and justice for all, as we look at what's happened on the streets, we are not a light to the world that we need to be. And that is our chance to do that. And the military has done that, and not often gotten credit for being the hand on work of managing freedom and giving people a sense of hope.
So talk about the gentleman that was on the plane on your return.
Yes. I'd spent 3.5 weeks over there, and I was exhausted because they kept me moving. And I was traveling home in civilian clothes. And I thought, oh, good, no one's going to know who I am. Yeah, okay. This little who'd walk, woman who walked around with 2 stars on her shoulders, no one would know who she was, right, before. But I got on the plane and we took off, and there was a young man as we landed to let some people off. I think it was in the United Arab Republic where we were landing. This young man came over to me and sat next to me and said, oh, I've been praying that I would have someone to talk to on the way home. And I thought, oh, I'm going to spend the next 8 hours having to talk with someone. And I said, Lord, give me the right thing. Well, this fellow was at Baghdad at the airport tent worshiping, and he wanted to talk to me about the concerns he had for his comrades he left behind. And we visited for probably 35, 40 minutes on the ground. And I had been doing a study in Proverbs, and found that Proverbs, which is the book of wisdom, I could refer that to him, and which gave him something to think about. I had a prayer with him after 40 minutes or so. He went over back to his seat. He had 3 seats against the window. I had 4 seats in the middle, and he slept the rest of the way. But he said, but just that my presence was significant as a chaplain, but it also gave me a sense that I was at the right place at the right time. And it's kind of amazing. It kind of blows your mind when someone comes up to you and says, you're the answer to my prayer. I wanted someone to talk to about this, and you're here. And I found when I was being challenged as being the first woman elected as a general officer to be chief of chaplains, and when we'd had no minorities before. And there were those who felt a woman shouldn't be in that position. And it was probably a year and a half that was very ugly. But I did my job with grace. I also knew that I was most qualified to be there, that I could do some healing for that. So it was in that you kind of realize that you've made a difference. And I spoke to 15 prayer breakfasts around the country that year. And 12 of those places, I had people come up to me as individuals where they told me how I had made a difference in their life. One was going to commit suicide, and she only went to the prayer breakfast because a friend said, you got to go hear her. 3 years later, I was doing a prayer breakfast in the States, and she was there. And she said, when I saw your name, I knew God had sent you here because I was getting as depressed as I was when I was overseas. And she sang me a prayer. Talk about going two-way streets. I needed a sense that my being there made a difference to her. I had an airman that I met when I was in New Hampshire, my third assignment. He was an E7, E8, head of all the equipment for U-2 pilots. And he came and sought me out and said, I want you to know I'm here because you helped me to not get thrown out of the Air Force. You got me back in my church. And it wasn't about coming to my services, it was going back to his faith group. So it's those kind of stories that gave me encouragement. When you get discouraged, look around, don't look down. Look around and you'll be encouraged.
What we like to do is we have quite a large following, and many of your classmates and fellow Cukeites. We like to turn it over to questions, but I want to ask you one more question. You achieved a lot of firsts, promotions in the military, firsts as a woman trailblazer. What would you say was your most significant first?
I think being the first woman chaplain on active duty gave me many, many, many more opportunities to be a role model, to be an encourager, to pave the way, even though I didn't intend to. That was not my purpose. So I think that's made my life more significant. And what made it significant is I have the only place in the world at the time I joined this Air Force that I could have had the experience as a woman minister was in the United States military. We have democracies around the world. I've seen them. They have chaplains, but they don't take care of the free exercise of religion for everyone. And we still struggle with this. And today I'm going to say the biggest issues are, how do you integrate and support all religious beliefs? We are committed to the free exercise religion of all, not only to those that we agree with. And if you serve as a chaplain, if you cannot support everyone, Muslim, Latter-day Saints, Jewish, non-believers, etc., you don't deserve to be in the chaplaincy. It's a sacred right and a privilege, and you're defending freedom and what it represents when you serve.
I'd like to turn it over to questions of anybody who'd like to ask Lorraine Potter a question. So I don't know how we do this, Joyce, with multiple screen. Oh, Tim, go ahead.
Yes, Lorraine, very inspiring to listen to you. I noticed that because this session is on my future purpose, I noticed that when you talked about your purpose seems to be very clear in every point in your life. It was enduring, it kind of flowed. I really like that because I have a feeling that we all think of a purpose as a destination, but really it's more encompassing than that. My question to you is in the military where you have position power, you have personal power, you have expert power. And sometimes, you go with a ranking system and you're not able to show your personal power or expert power quickly. How were you able to resolve that and package that to people?
That's a great question, because I think we get off track and don't give ourselves credit. Every one of you sitting here, your purpose is not, well, my purpose is to go or make dinner tonight. Well, that may be a purpose tonight, but in terms of who you are as a person, there's a continuity of that. And your sense of purpose, what changes is looking for the opportunities to fulfill that purpose. For example, the best thing I can say is if you're working on a team anywhere, and we all work on a team, whether it's in a job, whether it's at home or whatever, is the most important question that I was asked the first time I had to make a report to my denomination was, how have you made a difference to the organization in which you serve? Now, wait a minute, I'd been active duty as a chaplain for 6 months. What do you mean, how do I make a difference to this organization? I mean, we got thousands of people in the Air Force, and I was the most junior of the chaplain. And what I found out was I had to look at the organization I was in. And what I realized was in this hospital were basic trainees who could get overlooked, which meant that it could cost them a job because they couldn't go back to basic training on time. It could cost them their careers because if they got discharged. And what I learned was to say, wait a minute, if I can take care of one airman and make a difference in his life and confront the system, which was how they took care of the airmen at the hospital, I realized an injustice to one airman is an injustice to all, because he wouldn't be the only one that was experiencing the same difficulty. So we look for the opportunities where our purpose in life is. And our purpose in life is to make a difference, to find how and that changes depending on where you are. Fortunately, in my career field, in my ministry, I'm never going to be without a ministry. I do military funerals all the time because there aren't enough active duty who can do it. I counsel with neighbors. I live in a retirement community. Today I ended up taping so we can do a virtual remembrance service for people who have died in this last year. I mean, I never thought I'd do that this way, but it's kind of like there are always opportunities. How do you feel it? I don't like doing it that way. I like the old way. So look at opportunities to be who you are. Be true to yourself, be a person of integrity, and whatever you do it with excellence. And if you do that, your sense of purpose is going to grow because you're going to say, I've passed this way and I've made a difference. That's your legacy. And I know I wanted to end for those who are in transition. The two things that are important as we get older is we want to feel like we're making decisions for ourselves. COVID-19 sure took away a lot of power to make decisions. How many of us are getting to do Thanksgiving like we want to do? How many of us, and what I realized, they stopped doing military honors for veterans who had died during this time. And what is that? We want to be in charge. But what it says is find out what things you have control over and make your own decisions. If you have senior parents, let them come to a decision or lead them to the place where they think they've made the decision. But your limit. The second thing is, what's your legacy? And that's what gives your life meaning. And what gives your life meaning is your purpose. So my comment is, what am I doing to make a difference to my family, to my neighbor? Doesn't have to be big, wide, because then that's like throwing a pebble in a lake. It's going to impact.
We have another question, Diane Corcoran. Colonel Corcoran.
Yes, maybe you can help me with this. I too had a journey change from my first days in the military. I was a nurse, went to right out to Vietnam, right out of nursing school. And it was incredibly challenging, but one of the best experiences I've ever had. During that time, I had a very young man call me to his bedside and say, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise to believe me. This is 1969. It's the first occurrence I had ever heard of a near-death experience. Are you familiar with
Yes,
the phenomenon?
sure.
And so I told him something very positive about a gift, about embracing it, and all kinds of things, which made him feel calmer, and he was all right, he was normal. But coming out of that, I said, every patient who has this should, and at the time, I had no idea what he was talking about. I mean, it was 1969. Raymond Moody hadn't written his book. I didn't know what he was talking about. So when I came home, I started researching and testing and essentially have spent the last 50 years lecturing, researching, in the last 10 spent specifically on veterans, because we now have some research that shows 48% of combat veterans have near-death experiences, and most of them have nobody to talk to, nobody addresses it, the doctors don't want to talk about it. And what was most striking to me, and still is neither did the clergy. I have several examples of a young man who he felt like he got kicked out of heaven after his near-death experience and ended up back in his body. And then he went to the church and said, please tell me what happened. What was that? You know, am I going crazy? And the chaplain got up and walked away from him. And so he said, I felt like I was again kicked out of heaven. And we're still trying to find ways. We have a big article coming out in John Hopkins in Journal of Bioethics that myself and another person wrote the healthcare piece, and we had a clergy and an ethicist who talked about how unethical it was to not address this. We have our own issue with physicians, which we've been working on and have several now in our organization. But we have few clergy, a couple, but how do we, I mean, the very people who should have a spiritual understanding of what was happening to these young people and still is happening,
Diane,
can't deal with it.
Yeah.
can you form that in a question? What's your question?
How do we help? How do we get the chaplains to be knowledgeable and helpful in helping veterans and active duty who have had near-death experiences be helpful to them? I used to teach chaplains in the Army, but I don't know what exists in the Air Force or.
Well, I'd like to refocus that a little bit. I'll answer that, but we're talking, you know, she's asking that question about chaplains, but I'm going to turn it around to each one of you right here. Because the issue is that all of us have people that will share something with us, and how open are we to hear anything that's different than our own experiences? And if it has any religious connotation, we want to push it away because we don't agree. If you can't accept that God can use women to be clergy, what in the world are you going to do with this near-death experience? The issue is training all of us to be listeners, to believe, like this young man said, to believe what others are sharing with you. Some of the conflict with, if you've had teenage kids, is because you don't listen to them. You want to, you want to come back with an answer. And it's like, what you want to do is say, we want to be open to this diversity and do this. And what you do is sometimes you can't teach old dogs new tricks, but you can get them out of the way. And one of the things in the military we've had is to say, when I said, if you can't deal with people of different faith backgrounds and experiences and beliefs, You need to look elsewhere to do your ministry if you're into kind of converting everyone to do it your way. Now, none of us have all the answers, although some think they do. But I think our goal is when you have anyone come to you and say, can I share this with you? And I want, that happens with people with Alzheimer's, with PTSD. Get into their world. That's their reality. And you can learn something from it. So we have to have, it's hard to change, but we have to be willing to be open and listen to people who are different and say, this world is so diverse. And the question you ask yourself while you're listening is, what am I learning? Not what can I give to them?
We have another question, gentlemen. Amy Story.
Well, I'm Don Workman, and I think I'm the only sitting trustee at Keuka College who's on this call at the moment. And Lorraine, you and I know each other quite well, and Chris and I have known Lorraine for only 15 years. Some of you have known her for nearly your whole life, but we are always so impressed by what she has to offer, what she has to say. I've heard her give commencement speeches at Keuka College and other talks in the chapel, and today was no exception. Her presentation is as fresh and refreshing and meaningful. Each time I hear it, I always end up with a lump in my throat, and I'm constantly in awe of what she experienced and what she accomplished. And of course, she started this talk giving a great deal of credit to Keuka College. And I just want to take 1 minute. I know Amy Story was on this call for a period of time. I don't see her at the moment, but I just want you all to know, because you all, I'm sure, are here because you have a close relationship with Keuka College. And I think you can all imagine that this is one of the most difficult and challenging times in Keuka's history. And yet, I'm sure, again, many of you have been present over decades when you've heard that very same comment, that this is one of the most challenging times in Keuka's history. But I ask you, please, to reach out to President Story, reach out to others in the college community who you know, and voice your support. This has been a very difficult time since March, and it's going to be a difficult time going forward. And all of those young people who are our students
it's dark.
All of our students are in need of your prayers, your support, your best wishes, our faculty, our staff, particularly our administration, who are trying so diligently to lead us through this very challenging time. And Lorraine, I'm sure that your experiences of being the first in so many ways are it's almost an experience that Amy Story and others are having at Keuka College today, because who's ever been through what we're going through now in the past. So thank you for that moment of your time. It's wonderful to see many of you. I know some of you, and I can only tell you that Keuka College is persevering in every possible way to meet the current challenges and hopefully provide the education that our students need and want today, so that they can have the same opportunities, hopefully, that you have had in your life and in your careers. Thank you for listening.
I'd like to say one thing and re-emphasize, what Don's saying. It's not just worrying about Keuka College. Our legacy should be that we are concerned with what's required of us. And what's required of us is to reach out and to care for one another, to care about those people we can reach near and far, and those who have traveled some of the same routes we are.
I'm listening to
Make a difference
Zoom
where
call.
we are. That's our purpose, God-given purpose for each of us. And look for opportunities that you can manage to do that for someone in your family. It's always easier to do it further away in your family as well as in your community, and think about where you've been or what you would need right now to make a difference.
One more question. Anybody? Christine? Oh, you're mute, Christine.
Christine Elgar?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say hi to my buddy Lori. You're looking great, and I'm so happy that we can see each other through this meeting.
Thank you.
On Despicable Me 2
Is-
by Pharrell Williams on Amazon.
Yeah, Siri, Alexa, shut up. Alexa, stop. Don't ask me, Alexa's party. And she's gonna play happy music, and I didn't even ask her to. Okay, anyone else want to make a comment? Joyce, how about you?
Well, I'm thinking Eric Detter, are you still on the call? 'Cause
I am.
Eric is the chaplain
Hey, Eric.
at Cuba
Hello, everyone.
College, and I thought he might want to have a comment or two before we close.
Well, I always find it a privilege to hear Lorraine speak, and I find her to be inspiring and encouraging, and it's always very humbling to sit at someone's feet that is such a great servant of God. And so I am appreciative of hearing you offer words of encouragement again. And I appreciate the trailblazing that you have done, and that the course that you have set, and even the counsel that you have given to me when I've needed it as a college chaplain in now my 12th year.
Wow.
At Cuba College. Yeah. Yeah. With 2 kids in college, I know that that's actually really happened. It's been 12 years. So,
Yes.
and then to reiterate what Dawn had said, we will continue to persevere, and we will be carried by amazing people like you, and pray that you would do your best to make the world better wherever it is that you can, serving in whatever ways that you can, knowing that whatever you are able to do, a kind word could lift someone up. The story about the person that came to hear you speak, Lorraine, that was contemplating about dying by suicide, that I've heard you tell that before. It never ceases to grip my heart. I've had similar conversations in my life. Those little moments where you can just connect with a person, they make all the difference in the world. And you all have the ability to do that. And to our veterans, I want to thank you for your service, and for Joyce and for making this possible, and Vicki for making this possible, our deepest gratitude. So thank you all.
We had a lot of help from some very capable, competent people who are far more competent and capable at the social media side than Joyce and I. Sorry, Joyce, I didn't mean to drag you into that, but it's
That's
true.
quite all right. That's quite all right. So we're going to say, just for in closing, if anyone wants to stay and just informally chat, we will keep the Zoom room open and have that conversation in a few minutes. Just to lead up, for those of you who are regular attendees, and for those of you who this is your first time, know that we do this every Wednesday afternoon. It's called the Wednesday Pause for Purpose. And it usually features someone from whatever walk of life. And next Wednesday, which will be the 18th of November, we have the privilege of having Natalie Kerrigan with us. And Natalie is the Chief of Staff for Indeed.com. And Indeed.com is one of the most popular job search websites out there, has over 2 million visitors a month. And she is part of the brains behind the operation. And so it might be valuable, to hear about her purpose and passion journey of her own, as well as getting to know an inside view of what goes on at a job board website. So that's next week's session. The following week is that Thanksgiving week. So we will be breaking because it's the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And we pick up in December with our last 3 programs. December 4th will be Wendy Green, who has a podcast called Hey Boomer. And so she will be talking about that venture and her whole intergenerational mission to get different groups talking together. And that is the lead-in we had last week. And by the way, these are recorded and they will be on our website. So it's www.myfuturepurpose.com. And if you just go to Pause for Purpose, it has many of the speakers of the past couple months. But then we end the year with 2 speakers coming up. And on the 9th is a woman who's in her 40s, and she's doing it all. She's managing home and family and children and a full-time job. And she speaks 5 languages, has a Peace Corps background, and just got caught up in, she works at a university and just lost her job. So she's in the middle of a job search and all of this. So then from the standpoint of juggling home and family and job and figuring it all out, she will be December 9th speaker. And then we ended on December 16th with a woman who just celebrated her 87th birthday and published her 3rd book. And her name is Thelma Reese. She's in Philadelphia, and her book is How Seniors Are Saving the World. And so it's part of an intergenerational series. Two Wednesdays ago, we held a young man who was a college freshman, age 19, and his whole mission is about getting generations together. And so he sparked it with the whole Gen Z view of this, and shared with us a board he has put together. And he said the most clever and unique suggestions he gets is from the 7- and 9-year-old on his board of directors. And so it was just a fascinating look at the beginning and the other end with Thelma coming up on the 16th. And we welcome all of you to join us. Just go on www.myfuturepurpose.com and sign up, and they're yours. Vicki, I'm going to turn it over to you to close, and then we'll open the boozeless bar.
So I first want to thank Lorraine. I've heard a lot about Lorraine, the legendary Lorraine.
Oh, gee.
From Joyce, and certainly from all of you who are followers and admirers of her accomplishments and the trails she has blazed and doors she has opened for others. And thank you for your service and your passion and your purpose, and how you lead your genuine, true life.